in control. Peter wasn't fearless. He trusted the one who was greater than his fear. The storm didn't create Peter's faith, it revealed it. I want you to write that down because that's kind of important. The storm didn't create Peter's faith, it revealed it. The storm revealed where Peter's eyes were fixed. As long as Peter kept his eyes on Jesus, he knew he was going to be safe. And he walked on water because of it. But the moment he focused his eyes on the waves in his surroundings, he began to sink. The storm hadn't changed. It was the same storm he was in before. Jesus didn't change because he was the same Jesus that he was before. It's Peter's focus that changed. And that's true for us too. The storms we face have a way of revealing what we're really focused on. At the end, we're going to respond to an altar, and I want you to think about that, on what you're really focusing on when you're walking through a difficult time in life. So what was the purpose of the storm? The storms aren't meant to destroy us. So why would Jesus send his disciples into a storm? That's a question I answered. I've been wondering when I read this. If he knew it was coming, if he loved them, why didn't he just stop the storm before it even started? Because the purpose of the storm wasn't to destroy them, it was to grow them. Jesus wasn't trying to sink his disciples because his disciples were his disciples. He needed them to keep his ministry alive. He was trying to grow them for their later ministry when he was gone on the earth, after he left. Jesus was teaching them to depend on him. It was so the disciples would turn to him in that moment and in the coming moments when they would face persecution. This growth wasn't just meant for that moment, like I just said. It was for down the road. Think about it. Right before Jesus came to the boat, they had helped feed the 5,000 with 2 fish and 5 loaves. I had to make sure I got that right. The disciples had witnessed one of the greatest miracles of all time, and Jesus sent them into a storm right after. Because Jesus wasn't just preparing them for that night, he was preparing them for the rest of their lives. Later, Jesus returned to heaven, and these same disciples would face much bigger storms, like I said, persecution, death threats, getting told to not say Jesus' name anymore. The storm on the Sea of the Galilee was preparing them for the storms that were still ahead. I think God does the same thing in our lives. Sometimes we don't want God to remove every storm. We don't want to face difficult times. But sometimes God uses a storm to grow our faith. He teaches us to trust him and depend on him, to keep our eyes on him, keep our focus on him. Because our faith doesn't grow much when everything is easy, when everything is going our way, when we're not in storms. It's going to be real easy to keep our eyes off of Jesus. When faith grows, we learn that Jesus is enough, even when life isn't. Maybe you're in a storm right now that you would have never chosen. I don't know why God allows every difficult thing to happen, but I know this. If Jesus could use that storm to grow his disciples, he can use your storm to grow you. What you focus on determines what you turn to. So what does this have to do with us? Every one of us will face storms. Maybe your storm, again, is loneliness, anxiety, or depression, or anger, broken friendships, problems at home. Maybe it's fear about your future. Whatever your storm is, here's what I've learned. Every storm tempts us to find comfort somewhere else. When life gets hard, all we turn to is we all turn to something, People turn to social media, pornography. Some look for attention in other people, success in their sports. Some people isolate themselves in their room when no one is around them at night. Those things make us feel better for a little while, and they seem like they can satisfy us for that moment. But it doesn't calm the storm that you're in. You're still in the storm. You're still facing whatever you were going through. Only Jesus can satisfy that. My storm wasn't waves. My storm was loneliness. When I was in middle school and high school, I felt alone. I felt pushed to the side because I would ask people to hang out and later find out they're hanging out with someone else, and they said no to me. Sorry, I should have clarified that. They said no to me, and then they find out that they were hanging out with other people, and it made me have this anger towards God and this idea that I was pushed to the side. But oh man, sorry. And that hurt me. But instead of running to Jesus in those moments of feeling like pushed to the side, I started to turn to things that could only satisfy those needs in a moment. I started, again, searching for attention from others, success in my sport, and I turned to pornography. I turned to isolating myself in my room, and I thought that would fulfill what I thought was missing in that storm. But in those moments, I'm so thankful for parents who pointed me back to Jesus and parents who directed me to him and showed me who was really the person to turn to and the thing to turn to, and that was Jesus. When I was angry and discouraged, when I believed those lies, my parents reminded me of who to turn to and that Jesus had not left me. Looking back now, I realize something, that the closer I've grown to Jesus, the easier it has become to turn to him when life gets hard. That doesn't mean the storms won't come, because they do. It doesn't mean I never struggle anymore. But I know where to look now. If you're taking notes, write this down. I've said it a couple times, but I want to get this ingrained in your mind. What you focus on determines what you focus on in storms determines what you turn to. And when your eyes are fixed on Jesus, you'll discover that he's enough, even when the storm hasn't gone away. The only thing you should be focused on, Jesus is the only thing you should be focused on in those moments. What we focus on in those moments matter. Peter, later in the book of Acts, is faced with almost the exact situation as he was out on the water. He just got done, or in Acts, he preaches to a crowd of about 3,000 people or more, and then we find out that 3,000 of those people were saved. And this was after Jesus had left earth, so Peter has to look to Jesus in those moments. Right after Jesus got done feeding the 5,000, he sends his disciples into the storm to show them something. And he walked on water. Then a couple chapters later, they're faced with persecution, death threats, but they kept on sharing Jesus. They didn't stop sharing Jesus because they had the Holy Spirit living inside them. Jesus was preparing his disciples for what was to come after he had left them physically. Jesus was preparing the disciples to turn to him when faced with difficult times. Even in the storms, the disciples weren't looking in that moment. They weren't looking to Jesus, but later in those moments when they were faced with persecution, they looked to Jesus. It took Peter crying out to Jesus and saying, "Jesus, if it's you, tell me to come out with you on the water." It took that for them to realize that it was Jesus with them in that moment. You don't need to feel Jesus every time you face a problem, but you do need to know that he will never leave you. You may wonder why things didn't end up the way you wanted to. Relationships not working out, someone you love passing away, not getting the job you wanted, or anything else you prayed for. And maybe God didn't answer your prayer. I don't know, and I can't tell you a confident answer on why those things happen. And it's not because he doesn't love you. It's not because he doesn't care about you. It's because God does love you and he does care for you. He sees you in your hurt and your pain. I believe that God may be allowing you to face a storm that seems too big and seem like there's no way out, to grow you and to change you, and for an opportunity to turn to him. When we fear the storm, what do we turn to? Do you turn to those things that make you feel more of what you already were? Or do you turn to Jesus, the one who can take away what you're feeling and pull you out of the water and calm your storm? What you focus on determines what you turn to. What you focus on in the storm determines what you turn to. As I look back on my own life, whenever I would face tough times, I've realized something. The easier it has become for me to turn to Jesus when life does get hard. The more time I've spent with him and when life gets hard. I don't think Peter suddenly became a great man of faith the moment Jesus called him out of the boat. Peter had spent months with Jesus, walking and talking with Jesus, spending time with him, learning how he talks, all that. And when the storm came, he knew who to turn to because he had been with him for so long. So when Jesus simply said, "Come," Peter knew who was calling him. He wasn't trusting him because the storm had disappeared. He was trusting because he knew the one who was calling him. I think sometimes we expect ourselves to trust God in big moments of life without spending much time with him in the ordinary moments. Excuse me. Then when the storms do come, we wonder why our faith feels weak. But that's not how any relationship works. Trust isn't built on a crisis. Trust is built day by day. As you spend time with someone, you get to know them. The same is true with our relationship with Jesus. The more time we spend with him in prayer, in worship, in reading our Bible, we begin to become dependent on him. And we begin to know his spirit. We begin to know him and who he really is. That's why our daily walk with Jesus is so important. Learning to recognize his voice may not always seem exciting, but those are moments when God is shaping our faith. He's preparing us so that when storms of life come, our first response is to turn to him instead of searching somewhere else for comfort. If you're taking notes, I want you to write this down. Our proximity to God can determine what we turn to in any situation. The closer we are to God, the easier it is to turn to him and give him the glory, no matter if something is good or bad. The Bible gives us examples of people who were physically close to Jesus, but never really trusted him. The crowds followed him because they wanted another miracle. They wanted to see Jesus and they wanted to spread it, and they wanted to be there to be a part of it. But they didn't really know Jesus. They just followed him around. The Pharisees listened to his teachings, and they watched him heal people. Yet all of them still rejected him. They were around Jesus, but they never truly walked with him. On the other hand, we know the people whose hearts were fixed on Jesus, the disciples, those who were close to him. Peter wasn't perfect. We know he failed many times. But in this moment, when everything around him was falling apart, when the waves were crashing on the boat, when everyone of the disciples were freaking out, Peter knew where to look. He knew exactly who to call on. He wasn't fearless. He simply knew where to turn to. That's why I believe this truth is so important. What you focus on in the storm determines what you turn to. If your attention is fixated on the storm, you naturally start looking somewhere else to rescue you. But if your life is centered on Jesus, before the storm ever comes, you know where you're going to look when that storm does come. You're going to trust him, and you're going to look to him because he's faithful. It doesn't mean we have to respond perfectly every time. There will be moments when fear wins, when doubt creeps in, and when we take our eyes off of Jesus. But the more we walk with him each day, the more we learn that he is worthy of our trust. That's exactly what Jesus was teaching Peter on the night of the water. And that's what he wants to teach us today. I really wasn't planning on sharing this, but kind of felt like I need to share it right here. Another story of trusting Jesus in a storm was when my dad was diagnosed for the second time with cancer. It was a really tough time for me and my family. First time came around, I was young, and I didn't realize that my faith wasn't my own. And, well, it wasn't my own. I kind of depended on my parents. And the second time came around, and my faith was completely my own, and I could depend on Jesus on my own. And in that moment when I got the news, I was devastated, and it was really hard to focus on Jesus, but I came back to what I knew, and I knew that Jesus is faithful, and he's walking with me in this storm. So even though those moments of fear, I turned to Jesus. I turned to people in this church to help comfort me and point me back to Jesus. And I can tell you now that doing that in the storm, in that moment of my dad getting diagnosed with cancer, it saved me a lot of pain. And looking to Jesus, like, it changed my perspective on what I actually do turn to and what my focus is. Because if my focus was on something else, I would have gone down a road, and I would have had this thought that my dad's not going to make it out of this. And looking to Jesus was like saying, God, even if he doesn't make it out of this, I know you're still worthy, and I'm still going to look to you in this moment. There has been times I've turned to the wrong things, and there have been times that I believed the lies instead of trusting Jesus. But I'm thankful that Jesus doesn't give up on us when we fail. He keeps calling us back to himself. When your eyes are fixed on the storm, you naturally look for something else to rescue you, but your eyes are fixed on Jesus. You'll find that he's been with you all along. And he's the one that's worthy. And he's the one that can give you peace in those moments, give you hope, give you strength. Anything you need in that moment, he's the one to look to receive that. As we come to the end of the story, I want to go back to the question of where we started, of if you guys have ever faced storms. Excuse me. Every one of us is going to face storms in life. Some of you are in one right now. Like I've said, anxiety, loneliness, all the other stuff. The question isn't whether those storms will come. It's because they will. The question is, what are you going to turn to when they do? Throughout this passage, we've seen that Jesus has already been in control of the storm. We see that the storm revealed where the disciples were looking, and we've seen that God can use the storms to grow our faith instead of destroy it. That brings us back to the main truth I've been repeating. What you focus on in the storm determines what you turn to. Peter wasn't perfect. He took his eyes off Jesus. He began to sink. But it encourages me that when Peter did cry out, Jesus was right there to help him and pick him up. He immediately reached out his hand to pull Peter up out of the water. Jesus wasn't finished with him because he struggled for a moment. I think that it's important for us to remember that there are going to be times when we struggle too. There will be days when fear gets the best of us, when we believe the lies instead of truth, or when we turn the wrong way instead of in looking for comfort in those things. But Jesus doesn't tell us to clean ourselves up before we come to him. He invites us to come in the middle of our need. I love what Hebrews 4:16 says. It says, "Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." It reminds me that Jesus is worthy, and Jesus is worthy when we come to him in those moments of struggle. Notice that it says our time of need. God isn't telling us to come when we figured it out. He's inviting us to come when we're hurting, when we're broken, when we're lost, when we're struggling, and we don't know what to do next. That's exactly the kind of people Jesus came for. So tonight, I simply want to ask you, where have your eyes been? What have you been turning to? Have you been looking to Jesus, or have you been trying to find peace somewhere else? In a moment, we're going to pray and respond to an altar, and I want to give you an opportunity to respond. Maybe you've never given your life to Jesus. Maybe you're carrying hurt or anger because of a storm you're facing. Maybe you simply want to tell Jesus, I want to keep my eyes on you when I'm going through a storm. And you want to say, I want you to be the person I turn to when I'm facing a difficult time. So we're going to respond, and would everyone stand up for me? So if that's you tonight and you want to respond, would everyone bow their heads real quick? I want to respect everyone. If that's you tonight and you want to say yes to Jesus and you want to turn to him in those moments, everything we do reverts back to Jesus. We sang about the blood and the wonderful blood. And Jesus, what we look to in those moments reverts back to the blood, what Jesus did on the cross for us. So if you want to say yes for the first time to Jesus, would you raise your hand? Awesome. After we get done, if you said yes, you can come meet someone over in the corner, and we'll talk you through that. I'm just going to pray real quick. Jesus, thank you for tonight. Thank you that in moments of fear, in difficult times in our life, that we can turn to you. And if we're not, Jesus, I pray that we would just begin to look to you in those moments of fear. When we're feeling alone, depressed, or anxious, when we feel like there's no way out, I pray that we would just begin to look to you and our eyes would be focused on you in the storm. Thank you, Jesus. So we're going to respond, and I want you to think about this question. What are you focusing on in the storm? What are you looking to when you're faced with temptation, when you're faced with anxiety or fear? What are you looking to? What are you focusing on? Is it Jesus? Because if not, then we want that to be Jesus. We don't want to look towards anything else. So right now, would you spread out and across the room and just begin to pray and ask Jesus that, and if he would reveal that to you. So start walking around and asking Jesus what do you want to look to in those moments, and just begin to pray about that.